And here again, you see another article talking about this. And, we don't even recognize the fact of that the calendars have changed. So the Gregorian calendar was being introduced in 1582 by Pope Gregorian, right? Gregory the 13th. And they made important changes that was used by the Julian calendar. The biggest thing here is that it removed 11 days from our year to better reflect the time it takes the pale blue dot we call Earth to orbit around the sun. It didn't happen without protest. The English calendar writes of 1752, seeing British people take to the streets shouting, "Give us our 11 days." This happened because Britain switched over from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, which aligned them with Europe, and the people weren't happy about that, losing 11 days and all. Now, that might not sound like much, but over 286 years, it adds up. So much so that people are on Twitter doing the math, saying that if we follow the calendar, we're technically in 2012. So, as it says, it was all removed. All this stuff was removed, and so their ultimate conclusion was December 21st, 2012 is really June 21st, 2020. So does that, like he says here, does that really sound so nuts when we look at everything going on all around us? The whole COVID-19 thing, the riots, the protests. It is most definitely kind of a crazy world at this moment. And is it a coincidence that we have an eclipse coming? Another sign. So we have the eclipse coming on that day, which is, the start of summer. And we have, China and India standing off, the two biggest militaries in terms of people in the world, the two biggest countries in the world. Is it all just a coincidence?
I know, right? But the energies, thank you, Benjamin. We appreciate that. That's so sweet. Thank you. But the energies reflect that this is more accurate, because things are changing. People's darkness is getting darker. Their light is getting lighter. The contrasting is more contrast. I mean, it's probably the most contrast I've ever seen. And it's just getting escalated. It's just escalating over and over and over. And the energies are compounding. So, this is a really good time to start to understand yourself, understand who you are, what you're about, things like this, because everybody's going to be on a spiritual path. That's just where the energies are heading. And I think they're trying to dissuade us from understanding our history, understanding who we are, where we're from, because it's really hard to understand where you're going if you don't know where you've been.
Well, take the shift in calendars. I bet you maybe less than, I don't know, what do you think? 2 to 5% of the people realize the calendar changed, right, as far as the population goes.
Well, our education system.
Yeah, maybe somewhere in junior year of high school in history class, you read one line about that and that was it. So, when you think about it, things are so convoluted, and things have changed many times. Things are always changing and getting covered up. Mud flood and history is completely distorted. And again, history is written by those that are the victors. And what if the victors don't want you to know the actual history? What if they're doing things left and right to cover up the history, as we go? I think that's the case. They don't want us knowing these things. They don't want us figuring out these things. And they want us to fear things that are good in many cases. And then they want to elevate things that are not so good at the same time. Good to see you, Riser, as well. We love you too. Okay, Barbu is talking about Ketu. Let me hand it over to you there.
Oh, Rahu and Ketu are the north and south nodes of the moon. They're not actually planets. Ketu is like separation, spirituality, and Rahu is kind of a malefic energy that wants more of wherever it's sitting. That's the quickest way I can explain it.
Okay. Well, that was just brought up there. And as we see, don't worry, be happy. Be happy.
Yes.
And that's, and in reality, we should be happy to be leaving a dark age. Mm-hmm. Obviously. I mean, look at it. this timing feels pretty on. 2012 there were changes, but my God, the changes we have going on now are crazy. These are super substantial. They're super obvious. The system is starting to unravel tremendously all around us. We are all being faced with our own inner demons. As I see Coyote Prophet in the house. Good to see you as well, brother. There is so much going on right now. If you were to just go out and survey 100 people and say, do you think this could be the end of the age? What do you think?
Well, it certainly feels that way. I mean, looking at stuff, I don't think things can get any more inflamed without something major happening. But, it's all done by design. And, the elites, and I've seen this over and over and over, using planetary alignments as some kind of shove or momentum in the direction that they want it to go. When I feel like if we were left to our own devices, we would all be kind of, learning to work with ourselves. And like Grizz says in here, he says, and remember, wherever you go, there you are. So you need to be like the number one most important person you need to get along with in your head. And that's no kidding. That's serious stuff. It's important to be at peace.
So Ethiopia is fascinating to me in so many ways. And do you know what today is in the Ethiopian calendar? It's June 9th, 2012.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So it's 2012 in the Ethiopian calendar. And they use a Orthodox Tewahedo calendar. Now, Ethiopia is really curious because, it is thought that is where the Ark of the Covenant is. And many have thought about that and spoken about that in the past. As you see here, Christians in Ethiopia have long claimed to have the Ark of the Covenant. And, Ethiopian history is interesting, and the people themselves as well. Our origins are just really, really covered up. And I do believe that, we are all one humanity, but I think humanity is much bigger than we realize, and not necessarily just confined to this little globe.
Right, and there's many different types of beings. I've seen them in the channelings. I've seen them in just visions. When I project myself up onto something that I might consider a ship, I see different beings in there. So, I mean, where would these things come from? Where would these energies come from if they're not really there? That's just it. And then they tell us that if we do see things that, we don't see in the 3D where we're at right now, we're crazy. Here, take your medication. Stuff like that. They've been dirty the whole time.
And so we see the eclipse is going to go through this area. It's going to go through Ethiopia. It's going to go through some areas we were just talking about, including going through India here and China, and actually going right through where the border dispute is. What do you bet? What do you bet that something ends up happening over there? And look at where it goes through over here. And this is Taiwan. So it comes right through Taiwan. It's like it's making me feel more and more that a major triggering event may happen either on the border between India and China, or perhaps it does happen there, and then perhaps China moves into Taiwan and goes ahead and does what we've all thought that eventually they will do. But it is also interesting that it goes right through this area, through like Ethiopia, Somalia, down through Yemen and parts of Saudi Arabia, and all cutting across through Pakistan as well. It's pretty fascinating when you look at this. We live in a matrix. This is a matrix. It's just fascinating to see how it works.
It is fascinating, and it's fun to like unravel things to yourself. Like on Christmas morning, you get these presents and you don't always know what's in there, but it's fun to like unwrap them and discover them. And this is where we're at. We're at a place of discovery now, discovering ourselves, discovering our history. And granted, we only have to go on what they've given us, but I do believe that there is a lot of truth in a lot of things.
And as Brother Asaduzman's talking about walking away from the border, I'd love to see the soldiers of the world just throw their guns down and say, hell no, it's time to stop having these wars. Let's just instead, why don't we just have a feast and get together and talk about it? It's just crazy because the wars never ever settle anything. If you look at history, it's always one set of revenge after another. And if you're looking at China, thinking that Taiwan's a breakaway, renegade province, most of the people that are living in Taiwan now, they grew up free. They grew up in that country. China hasn't had claims to Taiwan in a long time, and most of the people's lives. So, there again, we talked about the restoration of Israel too, and booting the Palestinians out of it, and how it was the Balfour Declaration, which was given to us by a Rothschild. So the Rothschilds are the ones that recreated and brought back Israel. And again, 1871, Albert Pike, 3 world wars, it's all part of that plan. It's always about conquering and separating and dividing and conquering.
And there's our own Miss Nicole. Hi, Miss Nicole. I'm glad you could make it. Yeah, it's all about divide and conquer and divide and conquer. And, they take it all the way down to a personal level. And they even can have the ability to split our spirit if we allow it. If we don't try to go within, if we don't try to quiet our minds, they have ways to make us really chaotic, make our energy chaotic. And that goes out into the ether, causing more chaos.
And so our brother Soul Reviver is talking about fasting 16 hours before and after the peak of the eclipses, as it could be something that will help our bodies and also spiritually. So that sounds good. We could set a date for that and do that for sure. We're pretty much used to eating in about a 4-hour window typically. But we are definitely in a changing time right now. I feel the energies of the age shifting. As we know, if you look at it biblically, it's the birth pains. These are the birth pains. Labor is tough. And I've, cut 2 umbilical cords after watching, birth. So yeah, I could vouch for that. Labor is tough. And I know Cindy, has given birth 4 times. So she knows this.
Yeah, not easy, but, definitely a blessing for sure, because, our children is where it's at. Like the children are, granted, they have grown up in the system, but they still have a lot to teach us, so I think we can glean a lot from our kids. And one of my daughters says, she doesn't understand why there has to be war and why can't everybody just share, and that is like so simple. And that's like, that's how it should be. Why can't everybody just share?
Yeah, we need to just, throw the weapons down and refuse. And if we can get more and more people to wake up, then, that's really the main battle here, is waking people up to how we've been manipulated and how it's time for that to end, completely. We're ready. So many of us are completely ready for a new age to come, in which it's no longer this dark age of conquest and greed. And we need unity. See how we've been taught to fear that which we need. We're taught to fear unity and in all the world coming together. But that's exactly what we need. Of course, we don't need the WHO, the CDC, the UN, because these are all corrupt organizations under control of the darker powers of greed, division. And, we don't need them, but we do need to come together. That's the bottom line. So it's fascinating to see that, some things will not be stopped. They're just not going to be stopped, because as the energies keep coming in and changing us, we're going to change the planet. It's just that simple. It's just a matter of time. So Ethiopia really is interesting. And so it is currently 2012 in the Ethiopian calendar. Very, very interesting stuff. And of course we have the eclipse coming down through. Let's see if we bring that up. So you see here, it goes through Sudan, goes through more of the northern part of, well, it goes through portions of Ethiopia. As we see right through here, through Yemen, comes straight through. And we see Himachal Pradesh, Kashmir, Jammu. And then you have the Tibetan Autonomous Region. And it goes right through this whole area. And straight through the heart of Taiwan.
That is really, really curious how the energy, goes through that. Considering, what the energy can stand for and what it can do and the frequency that it brings. So that's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and as I've shared with you guys in the past, I have visions of being like in this area, and I do believe it was past life, as I've gotten that from others, that I had a past life like basically on the Tibet-Nepal border. And it's pretty cool because in meditations I could see out and I see a certain plane from being up in a mountain, and definitely feels like home to me. But that's probably why I've felt so comfortable with meditation and everything that is of the traditions of this area. So Ethiopia is fascinating stuff. And, Ark of the Covenant we've talked about as well. We've talked about like how religions have been tainted in so many ways, changed. Obviously, if we're talking about dark powers controlling the world, then it would make sense that they'd want to kind of hide things from us, especially things that are going to lead us to truth. This is also fascinating and has always fascinated me. So we have the Aryan invasion idea, that Aryans, and again, Robert Suffer's done some great work on this because he, I don't want to speak for him, but if you watch his videos and stuff, the ones that come and take over so many areas in pretty much a warlike manner often are either blonde or redheaded, blue-eyed or green-eyed. And he's getting to, I think, that these are people from Atlantis, survivors of Atlantis, that came and influxed all around different areas, all through the Mediterranean. We talk about the Basque population having like one of the highest concentrations of Rh negative and just unusual DNA. Well, the people that were in India originally were the Dravidians. And, again, they were darker skinned, darker people. They're still predominant in southern India. Northern India is basically more Aryan and more of a mix. And when you get down to it, you trace their DNA. It goes back to Sudan and Ethiopia. And it's pretty interesting to see that as well. It's just fascinating stuff to trace some of this. And another fascinating group is the Nagas of India. Because the Nagas, they actually say they came from a land that is now sunken. And of course, the Nagas in mythology are serpent people that are thought to live inside the earth, in the inner earth. So people, basically at some point in time migrated from here over into India. And the Aryan invasions that came, now there's those that think that whole thing is just a myth too and not really real. And again, with our history being so tainted, it's hard to say, but we can look at DNA. So, again, southern India is more Dravidian, and which is really people from this whole area in here. And they migrated over here, and it's fascinating. And then what I was talking about with the Naga people, as we see Bangladesh here, you see this is India and over into here. And over in this area, well, here you go, Nagaland, So these people say they came here when the land that they were living in, which was somewhere out here and is underwater now, went underwater. And that makes you think of Lemuria. And then eventually they settled over in here in India, and particularly over here in this area, Nagaland. Interesting stuff.
Super interesting stuff. I really like this stuff, kind of going over it, because we didn't get to cover much of this in school, which is unfortunate. I think there should have been a lot more of these places that are more spiritual background covered in school, but they have their own agenda, so they're going to teach us what they want.
So Asa Duzman says South Indian similar with Sri Lankan Ashura. So, I'd like to, maybe we should have a show with Asa Duzman sometime to give us a perspective from there, at least come aboard for a little while to talk. So Ashura, the Asuras, right, are, it's interesting again. Ashura, Asura, because Asura are the more, what's thought to be the negative forces of the higher realm, so to speak, but actually, walked amongst us. And you have the Devas being the positive ones and the Asuras being mostly negative. Although sometimes you could have a relatively benevolent Asura king and perhaps a Deva that was not as benevolent at times as well. So it's kind of really curious and really, really twisted and very, very interesting. But Rizar said, this area feels very spiritual. And it is. Because, if you look at India, for instance, and so many of these different areas where they didn't prioritize things. They didn't prioritize the physical life necessarily. And, the culture has shown that, that there was a higher spiritual value put on things when so much of the West has played kind of lip service to the spiritual while really just pursuing physical abundance and pleasures, material possessions, capitalism,
Yeah, capitalism, ego stuff, just it's all about meism. A lot of bad stuff like that, but it's not all bad. We are learning from it. We really are. As our culture evolves, it's a beautiful thing to see so many people becoming more spiritual and going within.
Most definitely. And so I find it all fascinating. So, the Ethiopian calendar is one I would take heed of, and they say we are in 2012. So curious, we definitely feel that the energies are of a changing of the guard, changing, of the age. And this is 6 things you may not know about the Gregorian calendar. And again, it was 1582, Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar. That Europe had always been adhering to the Julian, named after Julius Caesar. Another thing a lot of people don't realize is that there was 10 months previously, and so July is named after Julius Caesar, and August out of Caesar Augustus, Octavian, who was a really interesting character as well, and perhaps the most impactful Caesar in some ways. But again, this is that system of conquest that the world has known. Everything that we do really here in the Western world comes out of Greece and Rome. And Greece and Rome's, influence in thought and culture. So yeah, leap years, are one of the things, and it differs from the solar year, and some calendars are lunar as well. Some have 15 months. So it's fascinating, and some Protestants viewed it as a Catholic plot, and Britain's adoption of the Gregorian calendar sparked riots and protests. Well, maybe they say so. And before the Gregorian calendar's adoption, the English New Year began on March 25th. That's very different, isn't it, than what we have now? So, things have been changed. It's just that simple. Things have been changed, and that switch took more than 300 years to complete it. Now, what's really interesting, too, because when we looked at the Mayan calendar, let's go all the way back to the Mayan calendar. Let's see, where did I bring this? It was over here. No, that was the Kali Yuga. There, okay, living Mayan time. And this is a little bit small for my eyes. So, when we look at the year that this current age began in, it was 3114 BC. 3114 BC, which is interesting. It's really, really interesting because it's so close to the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And, the Kali Yuga started when Krishna left. When Krishna left the earth, that was the beginning of the Dark Age, according to Hinduism. And so there was a major battle, too. And the story of Mahabharata talks about this battle. 3140 BC, the Kurukshetra war ended. And that was a big, big war. That was the big speech to Arjuna from Krishna. For those of you that are familiar with the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. And so in 3102, Krishna goes, and that's the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And so, it's interesting that it's so close to the Mayan calendar. You're talking 12 years. And this is the opposite sides of the globe. Yeah. Is that just a coincidence?
Yeah, I don't think things like that are just coincidences. They're there to be looked at. But my question is, when 2012 was rolling around, at least what we perceive to be 2012, why didn't they bring up the different calendars then? It seems like we've known this stuff for quite a while, haven't we?
Well, there gets to be a craze, and people just, whether it was Y2K or whatever, you always think, this is it. People get excited and start to look into it, but I don't know why. I don't remember anybody bringing this up in 2012.
I don't either.
Maybe I didn't look hard enough. Maybe I glossed over. I don't know. I look a lot closer now because back in those days I was still just doing my own personal research, and I wasn't, I didn't have a channel or anything, channels to talk about these things. So, I go deeper now, and we spend a lot of time going deep along different lines of thoughts. So it's fascinating. It is really fascinating to think of this, but it really hits me. So you have the Mayans in Central America, and they are only 12 years off their line of thinking from the Hindus over in India. Those 2 points are so far away from each other. We're looking at people here, right here, are almost in agreement with people that live in here. That is almost exactly the other side of the world. And yet they agree that the age is within 12 years. 12 years from a point that's over 5,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So there has to be something to that. There most definitely has to be something to that. It's really fascinating stuff.
It is, and it can go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think the lesson here is since the previous 2012, we have learned about the different calendars, so this makes me want to expand my search even further. But you don't know what, you don't know what you don't know. And that's just a simple truth, but when you do learn more and you do know better, you do better. So that's always what we're striving for.